Hey everybody, Arjit here, and I'm outside the Cathedral of the Holy Grail here in Valencia. So I thought this would be a good place to address something that been thinking about a bit as I go through Spain and Europe in general. And this is addressing a complaint that I hear a lot from Protestants and atheists alike, and even liberal Catholics. It's about the wealth of the church. The idea is essentially, if the church is very, presumably their premise is the church is very wealthy, but it cares for the poor, how can the church justify having in the Vatican billions of dollars worth of artwork, having huge buildings like this, stuff made out of gold? How can it justify having all of this if the church is the church is dedicated to helping the poor? Now, number one, the premise is that the church can't own wealth, which I disagree with, but that's not really the topic here. So let's just kind of go through this. Firstly, is the church rich? Now, what does it mean to be rich? Does rich mean having a lot of money? Does it mean owning a lot of stuff? What does owning stuff mean? Like, farmers are often theoretically rich. The land their farms are built on is worth a lot of money, but most of them live pretty humble lives because their crops don't produce a ton of excess income. I mean, it depends on the farmer, but even in the medieval era, theoretically their land might be worth a lot, but they can't sell their land because they can't live on the money they get off of it. It's kind of the same for the church. The Catholic Church has billions and billions, maybe even trillions of dollars in assets, but it's stuff like this. It's this huge cathedral. The land under it is very valuable. Probably like the land churches are on in big cities alone is probably worth billions of dollars. Like how the Imperial Palace in Japan is worth billions of dollars. So that's certainly true, but what good does that do you in terms of paying for things? You can't access that capital. To get that capital, you would have to sell off churches, and there's a number of problems with that. Even if you wanted to, that would take years, and it would probably, if you sold all that off, it would decrease real estate values. But okay, so selling that off is not really practical. You'd also have to find buyers for big buildings like this, which is not easy. And then there's all the stuff inside of the church, and they're like, well, there's all these gold and silver things, there's all this art, etc. A lot of people criticize the Vatican Museum for being so opulent. But I think, once again, the thing you have to keep in mind is there's a difference between that and the actual money that a church has. Most churches are very poor, or not poor, but they operate on a very shoestring budget. Most priests make very, very meager salaries. Like at my church, they live in a rectory, so it's like a little dormitory with like 5 rooms where 2 priests live. And I think they have a car, because they need a car, but other than that, they live very meager lives, and their salaries are completely dependent upon the generosity of their parish. The parish generally doesn't have any other sources of income other than maybe the church getting rented out, collecting fees from collections from the membership. And a lot of people get triggered by that, like when they go to mass and the church is like, look, we're falling a bit short on money this month, could you give us some more cash? People are like, oh, it's the greedy Catholic Church demanding money. And well, Protestant churches do that too. And like, what do they think, that money grows on trees? I mean, you have to pay for the building, they have to pay for the lights, they have to pay for upkeep. These big buildings require a lot of upkeep. They have to pay the salaries of not just the priests, but normally they try to give the deacons a little money. You have to pay for supplies for the office. For big churches like this, you need security guards, administrative staff. It really adds up. And they need the money from the parishioners to do it. And the basic argument is, if the parishioners have the money and they're using the church, then they should make a donation to pay for the service they're using. And I just want to say, it's not like anybody's ever turned away. It's not like they say, oh, you have to pay $5 to go to mass if you can't pay it. It's what they're saying is, if you're a member of the church and you enjoy it and you want to keep going, well, then you have to pay for the church, you have to pay the priest's salary. And I don't really see what's so weird about that. It's just kind of reality. If like magically they got enough money, they wouldn't ask for more money. And then sometimes they might ask for money because they need a new roof or something, so they ask for a bit more. And people consider this like extravagant or something like that. Historically, the church had lands and businesses. Even in some countries, they still own stuff like hospitals and banks. But what happened in most countries is secular governments just stole it. They did confiscations. In a lot of cases, like England, that's largely where the Reformation happened, so that the secular authorities could just rob the church. And they took away its lands, they took away its properties, and it lost most of its sources of income, so it had to rely on donations from its parishioners. And people say, oh, the church's lands were legitimate. No, like, the churches purchased some of that over time. A lot of that was given to them. It was fairly common in the medieval era for when people died to leave money to the church or leave lands. Maybe they'd be a nobleman and they'd leave like a tenth of their lands to the church. Or they'd leave a large sum of money, and the church would sometimes have more money than they needed, so they'd invest it in land. Or they'd invest it in a bank or something. And that was what the church used to pay a lot of things. Now, in a lot of countries, there were church taxes, but you have to understand the church used to provide a lot of welfare services. Before the modern welfare state, they provide alms, medical care, education, that kind of thing, on a much larger scale because they had more money. And they do less of that now because all their property got stolen. And now they're, in many cases, impoverished, and they've had to shut down churches. So people are saying, well, Argent, why don't they just sell off all the stuff they have? Okay, well, let's just talk about that for a minute. Let's say this cathedral, for instance, they sold off the Holy Grail to some private collector in China. They sold off all the wall tapestries, etc. They're going to go into private collections and no one will ever see it again. I guess some might go into museums. But the history of all of this being here as one unit will be gone. Nowadays, anybody can come here and they can see it. It's in public view. And if we were to sell everything off, the collection would be broken apart and go to different places. The question is, does the church even have the right to sell it off? A lot of these things were donations. People donated money, or they donated a tapestry, or they donated their labor to build them. Is it really fair if an artisan made a statue for the church and gave it to them with the expectation it was going to be displayed in a cathedral, for them to sell it off and spend the money on the poor? I don't think that's necessarily moral. And then people probably also complain that cathedrals like this charge an entrance fee. So this cathedral, for instance, charges €7 if you want to go in and look around. And people say, well, that's just the church money grubbing. But look at this building. They need to pay upkeep. They need to pay security guards. They need to pay the couple priests who work here. It's perfectly reasonable for them to charge a couple of euros. They don't charge euros if you're here to pray, and they don't charge euros if you go to mass. They just let you in. They aren't barring anyone from religious services because of a lack of money. They ask for a modest contribution to maintain a huge building. It's certainly less than most museums charge and stuff like that. I don't know. I think it's perfectly reasonable. So the argument is we have to sell all this. The church doesn't have much liquid assets. We have to sell all their landed assets off. This will get turned into a nightclub or torn down and made into some office. All the art will be sold off. A lot of it will go into public collections. Some of it will go to museums in other parts of the world. And the legacy will just be gone. And it won't be here anymore to serve the local community. Like I said, anybody who works at these stores can go in at any point in the day and go to mass. And they might have to throw a couple euros into the collection plate because they're using a service. And once again, if they're like a poor person on the street and they want to come in and go to mass and they can't pay, that's fine. The church never guilts people over that. Asking people at the end of mass, hey guys, the roof is leaking, could you maybe spare us some money to fix it, is not begging. It's just, it's logical. Like, I don't know what people expect them to do. Sell off all the stuff that the parish uses, like sell off the tapestries that people use when they're praying, so then the people can't use them anymore. I mean, The church just doesn't have that much money in terms of actual money. And a lot of the stuff, like I said, has religious significance. The vestments, the articles. Well, theologically, you can't melt a lot of the stuff down because it's sanctified. It holds the bones of saints and stuff. Are we supposed to just fucking throw the bones of the saints out onto the streets, melt down the chalices they're in, and then sell them off to Chinese investors? It's absurd. So that's kind of my speech on the wealth of the church. I get tired of people complaining about it. The Catholic Church does an immense amount of charity, often with very little money. Often, I think, too much charity into the detriment of its religious duties. I honestly think we're too focused on doing charitable works these days, and they don't put enough effort into evangelization and maintaining our buildings. But that's just my humble opinion. That's my thoughts on the matter. I hope that kind of explains my position. I'll talk to you guys later.